Good morning. This is Melissa.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Before we get started, is it okay if I record this for credit?
Sure.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. How are you doing
And
today?
just, I'm good. Just so you know, I'm going to be hopping in my car driving to work.
Okay, no worries.
The background noises, it's just because of that.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
just the best time to coordinate a call with you.
Yes, ma'am. That's totally fine. I understand.
Okay. All righty.
All right. So, can you tell me kind of about like a little bit about yourself and like your professional training and experience?
So I consider myself an obesity scientist by training. There's not a degree in obesity per se, but
Okay.
I started off my undergraduate degree was in biochemistry. Um, I got interested in that because of a research experience I was fortunate enough to have when I was a high school student.
All right.
And so that's where I kind of fell in love with research and science. And then uh, I really enjoyed the research, but I found that I was always seeking to figure out how to apply the research more to impact human health.
Right.
So when I finished my undergraduate degree in biochemistry, I wanted to continue on in school, but I wasn't quite sure how. I had considered, maybe a graduate degree program in something like physical therapy or physician assistant. I'd already kind of ruled out going to medical school because I had shadowed a physician and that didn't interest me. And um, so I was kind of struggling to decide
Right.
what am I going to do with this degree in biochemistry? I did not just want to do biochemistry research because it seems so um, mechanistic, and I couldn't always understand the application of it
Okay.
and why it was important. For example, I was studying mitochondrial DNA in dairy cattle
Oh, wow.
in this lab, in this lab um, that I worked in as a high school student, and I didn't really have much interest in dairy cattle or their mitochondrial DNA and their genetic inheritance patterns for milk production.
Right.
So I think what happened is biochemistry does have application. That's why people are doing the research. But as a student, I had a hard time understanding I understood the application, but the application didn't interest me. So I was trying to figure out as I finished my degree in biochemistry, what can I do that will where the science that I'm doing, maybe using biochemistry, molecular biology, that the science I'm doing will directly apply to content area that I'm interested in. So I decided I would get a job working in a lab and just as a to get more experience and to support myself and then use that time to figure out what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted some kind of graduate degree, but I just didn't know what.
Right.
So I took 2 years. I got a job in a different city from where I did my undergrad, but I purposefully looked for jobs there because there was a large um, academic medical center there. So I wanted to be able to have access because I knew I wanted something health related. So I wanted to be able to have access in a place that would have degree programs that were health related. As you can see, my concepts were all kind of fuzzy. so so I said, well, let's at least get a job in this town that has a medical school and large medical research facility because maybe that'll help me. I'll be around people who maybe are doing stuff that I would find interesting. So I got that job um, working in a lab for 2 years. And I used that first year just to figure out, what might I want to do? That was my goal, was to have an idea at the end of that first year what I want to do. Use the second year to apply to different graduate programs and make a decision. And I found it was important that I had that kind of time limit in my head because job I had, there were several other friends I made during that time who
Mhm.
worked in similar lab settings, and they didn't really have that kind of time limit in mind, and they were mostly just dissatisfied with their jobs. They were kind of bored by it, but they weren't really making progress to figure out where to go from. So um, by that second year, I was applying to graduate schools and had discovered that I'd always had an interest in nutrition, um, and even more specifically, weight loss, obesity. I had come from a family where my family had struggled with weight. My mom was perpetually on, the next weight loss diet, fad, and so forth,
Right.
trying to manage her weight. And so, but I had not chosen to major in nutrition in college because I thought a career in nutrition was being a dietitian. And I thought being a dietitian was just about designing diets for hospital patients. I didn't realize there was much more to it than that. Now I understand it's a much more diverse and nuanced um, field. So what happened during that first year of exploring, I discovered there were graduate programs in nutrition where people were learning to apply the kind of basic research skills that I had really enjoyed in high school and my undergrad, but applying them to nutrition questions. And so that sounded much more compelling to me. So I started applying for graduate programs in nutrition, more or less thinking I wanted to focus on obesity and weight loss, but mostly just thinking, get a solid foundation in nutrition. And biochemistry is actually overlaps tremendously with nutrition because uh, there's, all the molecular mechanisms within our body are, are driven by and require various nutrients. So fundamental to nutrition is biochemistry, but when we talk about a career in nutrition, you're also talking about other aspects of ensuring people have access to healthy food and are motivated to eat healthy food. And
Right.
it goes beyond the biochemistry. There's behavioral science involved, there's food systems involved. It's really diverse. um, so at this point I was just thinking, this is really cool. I love biochemistry, and biochemistry is basically nutrition, and I'm going to start applying my basic science skills towards research questions that I'm more interested in, moving beyond that mitochondrial DNA and dairy cattle. This project. So I ended up getting accepted. I was told that there were kind of the top 3 universities in the country for nutrition, that one of them was University of Wisconsin in Madison. I was still a little kind of like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just jumping in here trying to figure this out. So I didn't apply to all 3 of those top schools because one was on the West Coast, one was on the East Coast, and I was in Iowa at the time. That's where I spent most of my youth and where I'd done my undergraduate. So I applied to University of Wisconsin and several other Midwest universities that have nutrition programs. Because I had been told that Wisconsin was one of those top 3, when I got accepted there, it was kind of a no-brainer. I just said, okay, that's where I'll go. So I went to school there thinking I would get a master's degree first and then try and decide if I wanted to go on to get a PhD. But I remember in that first month just loving everything about the program and thinking, oh my gosh, I found the perfect fit. This is what I'm meant to do. And so I committed to doing the PhD right from the beginning. So I looked, when you're in graduate school in this kind of research program, you need to find a research home in addition to taking your courses. I knew all this because I had worked in labs. That was a big advantage. I could have understood how graduate school works before I got there. So I knew I needed to find a professor who was doing research, was willing to take graduate students, and hopefully have funding for paying them on research assistantships. And ideally, I would have chosen a professor who studied obesity. where I asked about that, and there was really no one at the time who had openings in their lab for grad students focused on obesity. So instead, I just kept an open mind, looked at different uh, professors, and um, our program had a process. They actually, where they pulled all the first year students together and had professors who had openings in their lab come and give short presentations about their research. And that's when I heard a presentation by the professor who would eventually become my graduate dissertation advisor. He gave a short talk, and I just really liked his approach. He was a nutritional immunologist, so he wasn't studying obesity per se, but he was looking at this interface between immunology and nutrition. What I really liked about his approach was it was very creative, innovative. He thinks outside the box, and he was really driven by the end application of the research question. So all of his research projects had real world, big impact kinds of end game in mind. Some researchers, when they talk about their research, they get kind of lost in the details, like, oh, I'm trying to figure out, how this pathway is regulated by this molecule. And that was the same reason why I didn't want to go on and get a PhD in biochemistry. I'm like, no, I'm in this for understanding the application. So the fact that this one professor in particular really talked about big picture, why is this important? That just appealed to me. So I ended up getting accepted to work in his lab, and my dissertation focused on a particular kind of fatty acid called conjugated linoleic acid and how it impacts the immune function. He was doing several CLA immune function and fatty acid immune function projects, and the one I took the lead on was specific to a kind of immune reaction called type 1 hypersensitivity, those are the kinds of immune reactions like allergies and. So I did again, it was still basic science research, but I was using, my previous research had been more at the cellular level, doing cell culture and molecular techniques in the lab. And in this particular project, it was a little more at the whole animal physiology level, where I was manipulating the nutrition and then, causing the animal to be sensitized to an allergen, and then studying the effect of the specific dietary intervention on those allergic reactions. Still looking at molecular levels like um, release of histamine in different tissues, or expression of RNA to make protein and things like that. So it was a really fun project, and I loved the research area, but I still always had this inkling that I wanted to study obesity. So what I decided to do was kind of keep my eye open. When you finish a PhD and you're planning on a research career, for most career paths, you need what's called postdoctoral fellowship training. So you continue to work with another researcher, more senior researcher. You've got your PhD and you're kind of in a fellowship training mode. So you're not still a student, but you're not quite independent on your own, responsible for a research lab or a research clinic and so forth. So I decided I hadn't gotten too far down the path of planning my postdoc experience and applying. When I was at dinner, I was a speaker at a conference, and there was another speaker there who was from my same university, another professor, who also happened to sit on my graduate committee. And so we were sitting next to each other at dinner, and he said to me, what are you planning to do for your postdoc fellowship? And I said, well, I haven't figured that out yet. He said, I think you should come work with me. And he happened to be a professor who studies obesity.
Oh, cool.
He's a physician scientist. So he had a lab where he did, more basic science experiments, but he also had a clinic where he ran studies with humans. And it really appealed to me to learn. I kind of progressed from understanding how to use really basic molecular biology techniques